February 1st, 2025. A Sunday morning, Nancy Guthrie vanishes from her home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona. No ransom call, no suspect in custody, no car identified, just a woman, gone, and a man on a doorbell camera wearing a balaclava, a backpack, moving in the dark like someone who had done this before. That was day 1. Today is day 27. And something happened outside Nancy Guthrie's home 2 days ago that this investigation will not be able to walk back. Something that was witnessed live, on camera, by dozens of reporters, broadcast to the world in real time. Something that the Pima County Sheriff's Department then looked directly into the eyes of the press and the public and Nancy Guthrie's own family, and denied. Not minimized, not clarified, denied. And that denial, more than any single piece of forensic evidence recovered so far, may be the most telling development in 27 days of an investigation that has been described by a man who prosecuted 133 jury trials and spent 17 years in homicide, as in his own words, fundamentally mismanaged at the leadership level. Before we go any further into what happened at that house, I want you to understand what was already broken before that day. Because this story doesn't start with the convoy of black SUVs. It starts weeks earlier, with a series of statements, reversals, contradictions, and silences that have slowly, methodically, dismantled public confidence in the leadership of this investigation. And by the time those vehicles rolled up that driveway, the foundation was already cracked. On day 1, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos told the public that Nancy Guthrie had been abducted from her bed. He deployed his department. He brought in search teams. And within 24 hours, less than 24 hours, he called off the community search and announced there was no threat to the public. No threat to the public. From a masked man who had just forcibly removed a 71-year-old woman from her home in the middle of the night. Let that sit there for a second. The man on that doorbell footage, balaclava over his face, backpack on, moving through the dark like a predator, was still unidentified, still at large, still by every available metric dangerous. And the people of Catalina foothills, many of them elderly, many of them women living alone in homes just like Nancy's, were told, "You're fine, stand down." Days later, when the footage of the man in the balaclava was released publicly, the reaction was immediate. People were terrified. Not because of speculation or rumor, because they could see him, and they understood, in a way that apparently the sheriff's messaging did not, that this was not a contained situation. This was a predator who had operated in their neighborhood, who had surveilled their neighbor's home, who had come back on what sources across multiple outlets confirmed were different nights, and done this in the dark. The sheriff's response to questions about whether those two images, the man with the backpack and the man without, were captured on different nights. Quote, "Any mention of that is speculation." Meanwhile, sources for ABC, Fox News, Arizona Family, and virtually every other major outlet covering this case had confirmed exactly that. 2 different nights, 2 separate visits to Nancy Guthrie's front door. The sheriff was not saying he couldn't confirm it. He wasn't saying it was under investigation. He was calling the reporting speculation, reporting that every other outlet in the country was sourcing directly from law enforcement contacts. And that's the pattern. That is the pattern that has defined this investigation from the outside, and that reached its most stark and undeniable expression on day 25. February 25th, a Tuesday, and the single most active day at Nancy Guthrie's property since she disappeared. It started mid-morning. Unmarked white vehicles, pickup trucks, at least one with a hard shell enclosure of the type typically used by CSI units, pulled onto Nancy Guthrie's driveway. No insignia, no markings. At least one individual, according to reporter Brian Enton, got out and walked around the back of the house. These were not neighbors, these were not delivery drivers, these were people moving with purpose, in a deliberate pattern, around a property that has been at the center of a federal kidnapping investigation for nearly a month. Approximately 30 minutes later, they arrived. A convoy. That is the word used by people who were standing on that street watching it happen. A convoy of black SUVs came rolling up the road, the same road that, incidentally, the Pima County Sheriff's Office had recently converted to a one-way street, ostensibly to manage the flood of media covering the case. The convoy drove the wrong way up that one-way street. Think about what that tells you about who these people were and how much they cared about the local traffic arrangement. In the middle of that convoy was one SUV, blacked out windows, completely obscured. It did not stop at the curb. It did not park along the street. The garage door to Nancy Guthrie's home opened. The vehicle pulled in. The garage door came down. It was inside for approximately 1 hour. Then the garage door went back up, the vehicle pulled out, and it left quickly. Not slowly. Not like someone finishing a casual walkthrough. Quickly. The people who exited the other SUVs were wearing blue suits and white shirts. No uniforms, no insignia. Reporters on the street, experienced journalists from major outlets who have covered law enforcement their entire careers, looked at these individuals and said, "That looks like FBI. That looks like federal prosecutors." Others wondered, are those attorneys? Are those investigators from another jurisdiction? Fox News Digital moved first with a confirmation. The United States Attorney's Office for the District of Arizona confirmed to Fox that federal prosecutors had visited Nancy Guthrie's property to assist the FBI with, quote, "a routine legal process," end quote. Brian Enton, whose sourcing throughout this case has been among the most reliable of any reporter on the ground, confirmed through his own contacts that at least one Pima County homicide detective was also present on that property. So you had the FBI. You had federal prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Arizona. You had at least one local homicide detective. And according to Fox reporter Matt Finn, who was working the story in real time, people were going in and out of both the main house and the guest house on the property. Multiple agencies, both structures on the property, one vehicle that spent an hour inside the garage with the door down, gloves visible on at least one of the individuals moving through the scene. And then the Pima County Sheriff's Department issued its statement for the day. Quote, "The Pima County Sheriff's Department reports no activity. No activity." There is a principle in American criminal law that Matt Murphy, a homicide prosecutor from Orange County, California, who tried 133 jury trials over 17 years, who worked alongside the FBI on high-profile cases, and who has written extensively on murder prosecution, described with a phrase that I think is going to stay with this investigation for a long time. In his words, and I'm quoting him directly, "This is amateur hour." He said it not once, but repeatedly, and not casually, but with the kind of exhausted, precise frustration that comes from someone who has spent 2 decades doing this the right way and cannot watch it being done wrong without saying something. In Murphy's assessment, and this is his professional opinion based on what has been publicly reported, this investigation has been fundamentally mismanaged at the leadership level. And his reaction to seeing those blue-suited individuals walking through the perimeter of Nancy Guthrie's home on day 25 was not relief. It was not optimism. It was a question, and a damning one. If those are the first prosecutors who have been inside that house, in his words, that is shameful. Because here is what most people watching this case from the outside do not fully understand. In a properly run investigation of this magnitude, prosecutors are not a late addition. They are not the people who show up after the detectives have done their work and the case gets handed off like a baton. In jurisdictions that handle these cases professionally, and Murphy named Orange County as his reference point, prosecutors are at the crime scene before the blood has coagulated. They are there alongside investigators before the evidence is catalogued. They are there because their job is not only to understand what happened, but to anticipate what a defense attorney is going to do with everything that happened, and to make sure that the decisions being made in the field, the way evidence is handled, the way suspects are approached, the way warrants are executed, do not inadvertently hand the perpetrator a pathway out of accountability. That is what vertical prosecution means. One team assigned from the beginning, following the case from the crime scene to the courtroom, protecting the integrity of the prosecution from day one. And as of day 25, the Pima County attorney, a woman named Laura Canova, had been, in Murphy's word, a ghost. Now, there is a caveat here, and it is an important one. We do not know what has been happening behind the scenes. Murphy himself said this clearly. Maybe she has been quietly working this case the whole time, and the public just hasn't seen it. Maybe she is more professional than the sheriff, in the sense that she understands you do not hold press conferences on active investigations. Maybe she is the duck, calm on the surface, moving frantically underneath. That is possible. That is something worth holding on to. But as day 25 drew to a close, the Pima County Attorney's Office released a statement confirming that veteran prosecutors from their office continue to work with the Sheriff's Department, the FBI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office on the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. And the timing of that statement, arriving as the day's events were being dissected by reporters and commentary across the country, suggested either a very organized communications team or an office that had been watching the same coverage as the rest of us and felt the need to respond to the mounting questions. Murphy's reaction to that statement was direct. I hope it's true. I have no information that it is. Now let's talk about what these people were actually doing inside that house. Because the blood evidence, a subject that has been handled so poorly by the sheriff's communications team that it has generated its own separate wave of questions, becomes extremely relevant here. On day one, the sheriff stated that there was evidence inside the home concerning enough to bring in homicide detectives. He stated that Nancy Guthrie had been abducted from her bed, and then, in a decision that left investigators who have spent careers in homicide shaking their heads, the scene was returned to the family in less than 30 hours of CSI work. 30 hours. For a potential abduction with blood evidence, with what was being described as a concerning scene. 30 hours. For context, Murphy handled cases where the crime scene tape was up for days, where prosecutors and forensic specialists worked in tandem for extended periods, precisely because they understood that what you do in those first hours and what you preserve in those first days determines whether you win or lose in a courtroom years later. Here is what we know about the blood evidence from sourcing that has come together over the course of this investigation. There are blood droplets on the tile of Nancy Guthrie's front entryway outside the home. This has been reported widely and has not been credibly challenged. A well-informed law enforcement source connected to this investigation confirmed something more, that the same pattern, blood droplets, exists inside the home as well. Not a sign of a violent struggle, not footsteps through blood, droplets, inside and outside. What does that mean? It depends enormously on where those droplets are located, and that is precisely the kind of analysis that a blood spatter expert, a real forensic discipline with decades of established methodology, can extract extraordinary amounts of information from. The direction of the blood tells you about direction of movement, the pattern tells you about velocity and height of the source. If there is blood at a location that corresponds with the bed from which Nancy was reportedly taken, that tells you something very different than blood droplets in a hallway. The shape of the drops, their spacing, whether there is cast-off, blood thrown from a moving source, a wound, a weapon, on walls or ceilings, all of that builds a picture. And federal prosecutors walking through that scene with gloves on, taking their time in the main house and the guest house, are likely doing exactly that, looking at what is there, building a prosecutorial understanding of the physical evidence before they are in a position to evaluate what it means for the case they may eventually have to make. Here is what we do not know: whether any of that blood evidence has been compromised by the early return of the property, whether the 30 hours of CSI work was sufficient, whether the family or anyone else has been inside that home in a way that affected what was there. And here is what makes that uncertainty particularly uncomfortable. The DNA evidence from the black gloves, found approximately 1.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, was described by the sheriff as a mixture that investigators were struggling with. The DNA lab in Deerfield Beach, Florida, which, it should be noted, has an excellent reputation and is regarded as a world-class facility, said nothing publicly. because the lab does not speak. The sheriff speaks for the lab. And when Murphy heard that the sheriff described a DNA mixture as something investigators were struggling with, his reaction was precise and worth understanding. He said, "If that is a properly accredited lab, the director is probably pulling their hair out, because DNA mixtures are not a problem. They are routine. In every sexual assault case, you have a mixture. Mixtures are a baseline condition of forensic DNA analysis, not an anomaly." What is actually night and day different, apples and oranges in the forensic world, is the distinction between a mixture and a partial sample, meaning a sample where insufficient DNA was recovered to generate a CODIS match. That is the report that came out approximately 24 hours after the sheriff's statement. Not a mixture problem, a partial sample. Two entirely different things, described publicly in a way that conflated them into a single problem. Murphy's conclusion: the sheriff misspoke again. And this is the architecture of what has made this investigation so difficult to trust from the outside. It is not one misstatement. It is a pattern. The abduction from the bed, walked back. The no threat to the public, contradicted by footage released days later. According to sources reported by multiple major outlets including Fox News and ABC, the family became a focus of the investigation early on, and a family member's vehicle was towed under warrant for processing. The sheriff later publicly stated the family had been cleared, including spouses. But the car, taken under warrant, described as under processing, remains in the department's custody. The DNA mixture narrative, corrected within 24 hours by reporting from every major outlet. And now, no activity at the house, reported on the same day that dozens of journalists watched a federal convoy arrive, watched a black SUV disappear into a garage for an hour, watched people in gloves move through two structures on the property. On the subject of the car, this deserves attention of its own. Reporter Brianna Whitney of Arizona Family, who has been doing some of the most methodical work on this case, published a statement she received from the Pima County Sheriff's Department in response to her direct inquiry about the status of the towed vehicle. The response, quote, "All we can say at this time, the vehicle is still part of the investigation." End quote. The family was cleared, spouses were cleared, but the car is still part of the investigation. This is not a minor inconsistency. You cannot hold a vehicle under warrant while simultaneously announcing that the people associated with that vehicle have been cleared. Those two statements are not compatible within a coherent evidentiary framework. Either the vehicle is relevant to the investigation, in which case, what does that mean for the clearance of the family? Or it is not, in which case, why does the department still have it? And why can they say nothing more about it weeks after it was taken? Murphy's response to this was precise. The sheriff does not get to rule people out. That is not his authority. The decision to eliminate a suspect is a prosecutorial decision made by the people with charging authority. The sheriff can book people. He can request charges. He cannot clear them. And until there is a suspect in custody, until there is a complete picture assembled from phone records and digital evidence and forensic material and witness testimony, until the case is solved, every line of inquiry must remain open. Because he has seen too many cases where the obvious answer was wrong, where a single piece of evidence turns an entire narrative upside down. He described one such case from his own experience, a double homicide where a man staged a crime scene so precisely that Murphy himself walked in, looked at it, and for a brief moment accepted the narrative the killer had constructed. His own detectives pushed back. They were right. He was wrong. And the lesson he took from it was not embarrassment, but precision. You do not close the door on any line of investigation until the case is solved and a prosecution has been completed. Now, the one-way street. This is a small detail, but it matters. The Pima County Sheriff's Office converted the street in front of Nancy Guthrie's home to one-way traffic in recent days, officially to manage the volume of media and activity. Also in recent days, they announced expanded parking restrictions along that street and several surrounding streets, making it significantly more difficult for reporters with equipment to maintain their presence. The same day that federal prosecutors and FBI agents arrived in a convoy of black SUVs and drove the wrong way up that one-way street. Brian Enton, a reporter who has been on the ground since nearly the beginning of this case and whose sourcing has been consistently reliable, has spoken with neighbors in that community, and those neighbors have said something important. Yes, it is inconvenient to have all these reporters here. Yes, it is disruptive, but we want them here, because when the reporters leave, the story leaves. When the story leaves, the tips stop. When the tips stop, the pressure on this investigation goes away, and the neighbors of Catalina Foothills, people who have lived in that community for decades, who understand that a man in a balaclava surveilled and then entered a home in their neighborhood, want that pressure to remain. The restrictions are making it harder to maintain it. He has also, as of day 25, announced that the Pima County Sheriff's Department will be limiting its media updates going forward. No more near-daily statements. Updates will be issued only, quote, when new information warrants release. This announcement came on the same day that the department issued a statement saying no activity had occurred at the house. On a day when every reporter standing on that street had watched the most significant visible law enforcement presence in nearly a month arrive, enter the property, spend time in both structures, and leave. There is a political dimension to all of this that has also surfaced this week, and while it is not the core of this investigation, it provides context for the culture from which these communications failures have emerged. Heather Lapen, the Republican candidate who ran against Sheriff Chris Nanos in 2024 and lost, gave an interview to The Hollywood Reporter in which she described the sheriff's leadership style in stark terms. She alleged that top homicide detectives who had supported her campaign were sidelined. She claimed she was the target of 13 internal affairs investigations in 6 months, each of them, she alleged, an attempt to discredit her as a political opponent. She used language about his management style that is direct and on the record. These are words from a political rival in a lost election. That context matters. Lapen has every reason to be critical and no particular obligation to be fair, but the leadership pattern she is describing, one that prioritizes optics over operational integrity, that sidelines experienced investigators, maps onto what we have been watching from the outside of this investigation for nearly 4 weeks, in a way that is difficult to ignore. Because the people on the ground, the detectives, the deputies, the CSI professionals who have been working this case without sleep, without clear leadership, in some cases without knowing who is in charge, those people are not the problem. Murphy made this explicit, and he meant it. The rank-and-file law enforcement officers working the Guthrie case are working their hardest. They are grateful for the FBI. They have built relationships with the federal agents that will outlast this case. The problem is not the people on the street. The problem, in Murphy's professional assessment, is the leadership layer above them. Now let's talk about the tips. Because on day 24, Savannah Guthrie, Nancy's daughter, the NBC journalist, released a public statement and an Instagram post announcing that the family is offering a $1 million reward for information leading to Nancy's safe return. The post included words that have now been noted by 2 separate sources in this investigation, taken from her bed in the dark of night. Those are Savannah's words. She is a professional journalist who chose them deliberately. The sheriff originally used similar language, abducted from her bed, then appeared to soften or qualify that description. Savannah has now used it again explicitly in a formal public statement. Within 24 hours of that post, the FBI reported receiving 2,500 new tips. This is significant and also complicated. A $1 million reward generates calls. Some of those calls come from people who genuinely have information and now have a financial motivation to come forward. Some come from people who always had information, but felt unsafe until a sum of money large enough to relocate a family made safety feel achievable. Some come from the well-meaning, people who saw something in January that didn't register as relevant until they saw the reward notice. And some, Murphy noted with a directness that is worth repeating, come from individuals who seek to exploit the grief of a family in crisis for personal gain. Those who exploit tragedy for personal gain represent the lowest form of opportunism. None of those fraudulent letters or messages are real. None of them. And the damage they do to families already suffering is something that those working these cases take personally. One neighbor tip that has surfaced through Fox Digital is worth examining specifically. A woman who has lived in the Catalina foothills for approximately 30 years says she saw a man near Nancy Guthrie's home in January who, quote, didn't fit in the community. He didn't have your typical walking gear on. His hat was pulled far over his eyes, end quote. On its own, this is exactly the kind of tip that floods an investigation and almost never breaks it open. A man with his hat down, unusual clothing, in January, weeks before Nancy disappeared. Murphy was candid about it. When that is the headline tip of the day, we may be at the bottom of the barrel in terms of new leads. But he also told a story about his own Naui case, a kidnapping, a murder in the desert, where a canvas knocked on the door of a woman who had memorized a license plate. One woman, one detail, and the case broke open. You never know which door holds the answer. That is the reason you knock on all of them. And it is, by the way, another reason why the quality and consistency of the investigation's public communications matters. Tip lines succeed when people trust the investigation enough to call. When a department's public messaging is in a state of complete breakdown, some of those people stay quiet. Some of them decide it is not worth it. Every unforced error in a press statement is potentially a tip that does not come in. There is one more thing from day 25 that deserves to be stated plainly, because it may end up being the most consequential development of this entire week. A neighbor of Nancy Guthrie told investigators that they came to her home 5 separate times. 5. And on each visit they asked specifically for home security footage from January 11th. The sheriff has publicly confirmed that his department issued a request for security video from the period of January 1st through February 1st, a full month. But this neighbor, and possibly others, were specifically asked for January 11th. Not the month, the day. A specific date, asked for across multiple visits by investigators, who clearly felt it was important enough to return 4 additional times. We have known for some time, through sourcing across multiple outlets, that the 2 images of the man at Nancy Guthrie's front door, the image with the backpack and the image without, were captured on different nights. The sheriff says that any such reporting is speculation. The sources behind that reporting say it is confirmed. January 11th has now emerged as a date that investigators are pursuing with a specificity that distinguishes it from the broader sweep of the month-long request window. What happened on January 11th, we do not know, not yet. But when investigators go back to the same neighbor 5 times and ask the same question about the same date, that date means something, and whatever it means is now in the hands of federal prosecutors who were inside Nancy Guthrie's home for the better part of a full working day on February 25th. Here is where we are on day 27. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 27 days. The man who took her has not been identified publicly, no suspect has been arrested, no vehicle has been named. The DNA from the gloves found 1.5 miles from the home returned insufficient material for a CODIS match. The car taken under warrant from a family member remains in the custody of the Pima County Sheriff's Department and is described as still part of the investigation, despite the family having been publicly cleared. The Sheriff's Department has announced it will be limiting media updates. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Arizona has confirmed federal prosecutorial involvement. Brian Enton has confirmed local homicide detective presence at the same scene the sheriff described as having no activity. And somewhere, presumably, the duck is paddling. Murphy said something in closing that is worth sitting with. He said, "One day this case is going to be solved. Maybe tomorrow, maybe in a year, maybe in 5 years, but one day it will be solved." And the decisions being made right now, the way evidence is handled, the way communications are managed, the way agencies coordinate or fail to coordinate. Those decisions will either support a successful prosecution or they will undermine it. And if they undermine it, the person who did this walks, and then they do it to someone else. That is not a hypothetical. That is how the justice system works when cases are mishandled. And that, in the professional opinion of a man who has spent 21 years prosecuting the worst crimes human beings commit against each other, is what is at stake in Pima County right now. If there is anything that you have seen, heard, or know about the area of the Catalina foothills in Tucson, Arizona, dating back to January 1st of this year, the FBI wants to hear from you. The number is 1-800-CALL-FBI. That is 1-800-225-5324. The information that breaks this case may already exist in someone's memory, in someone's security footage, in someone's knowledge of a person whose behavior changed on or around the 1st of February in a way that has not been explained. If you know something, they need to hear it. Nancy Guthrie's family is waiting. These are not just events unfolding on a news feed. This is a mother, a grandmother, a woman who built a life in those foothills and who, by every account of everyone who knew her, did not deserve what happened to her on the first day of February. Her daughter has said publicly what the family is beginning to fear. But they are still asking. They are still fighting. If this case matters to you, and it should, subscribe to Crime Blackline Archive. We will be here as long as this investigation continues, and we will not stop asking the questions that deserve answers. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on the sheriff's communications and what you think is really happening inside this investigation. Because 27 days in, with a federal convoy that officially didn't happen and a car that shouldn't still be in evidence, the questions are only getting louder. These are not just stories. These are real people, real lives, and real mysteries that deserve to be remembered.